This is The Guardian.
A warning before we begin. This episode contains distressing content with references to allegations of violence and sexual abuse. Please listen with care. I'm Bridie Jabour, coming to you from Gadigal land, and this is Who Cared? The Disappearance of Amber Haigh. There have now been 38 witnesses called in the trial of Robert and Anne Geeves, who are charged with the murder of Amber Haigh. This week, the court heard more about the weeks and months following Amber's disappearance, as well as further testimony and allegations about Robert Geeves' past.
It was a week of contrasts in this murder trial. We heard evidence about Amber Haigh, the young mother, making her way in the world. She was vivacious and full of youth and joy, besotted with her young son. And we heard evidence which referred to allegations of extreme violence taking place at the property of Robert and Anne Geeves. We saw a hostile witness compelled to attend court by force of subpoena. And we saw other witnesses who came to court willingly, but who by the end of the week had had their evidence ground down.
Amber Haigh was 19 years old when she disappeared in 2002, leaving behind a 5-month-old son she had with Robert Geeves. The trial of her murder is now in its 5th week. It's Monday, the 22nd of July.
It's a freezing, scudding Monday morning in Wagga Wagga. And Ursula really doesn't want to be in court. Ursula had an affair with Robert Geeves and bore him a child subsequent to his relationship with Amber Haigh, and Amber giving birth to a son. Ursula was appearing in court under force of subpoena. She asked to be allowed to enter the courthouse via an alternative hidden entrance so as to escape public scrutiny or being photographed by the media. Everyone comes to court as an equal, Justice Lonergan said. Ursula was asked to reread her statement to police ahead of going into the witness box, but she refused to do it. She told the court, "I don't wish to be here. I have other things to do with my life."
Ben, there are several women involved in this trial who have had some sort of relationship with Robert Geeves, mainly Amber Haigh and the co-accused Anne Geeves. But this week we heard from another, and she was actually in the witness box.
Ursula was in the witness box, but she didn't want to be there. Now, we've had witnesses in this trial who were intimidated by the courtroom, who were unfamiliar with legal processes, who struggled with their memories or writing or to articulate their evidence, but this was something entirely different. It was so obvious the judge was moved to comment, "I have formed a view that she was evasive, obnoxious and guarded, and her tone was arch." The judge also said of Ursula, her demeanour was deliberately unhelpful. Ursula had an affair with Robert Geeves and bore him a child after Amber Haigh's disappearance. They lived together for 6 years. She repeatedly told the court she couldn't recall details of conversations with Robert Geeves, with his wife Anne, or with police, and that they never ever spoke about Amber Haigh and what might have happened to her. The Crown Prosecutor, Paul Kerr, made an application to treat Ursula as what's called an unfavourable witness, sometimes known as a hostile witness, arguing that she wasn't making a genuine attempt to give evidence. The Crown submission, which was paraphrased by the judge, was that Ursula had lied to the police, had lied to the coroner, and was lying now in her evidence at this trial that she'd never had a discussion with Robert Geeves about Amber Haigh. And the judge said, "Really what you're saying is she was lying then and she's lying now." The judge denied the Crown's application, but said she could simply reject Ursula's evidence if she chose.
But she did go on to give some evidence about a conversation she had with a police officer, didn't she?
She did. There's a report that's been tendered in evidence in court, and we've read that report. And that's about a conversation between Ursula and Robert Geeves, where Robert Geeves is saying he and his wife want another baby and asking about finding a surrogate mother. But when she was interrogated about that conversation, Ursula told the court she couldn't really remember the details, and she said the surrogacy conversation was just generally talking about it like any other subject. It was a topic of conversation, no particular interest than any other. On Tuesday, we heard a little more about Amber Haigh, the young woman, the young mother. Janice Broderick was a real estate agent who let a small bedsit to a teenaged Amber Haigh in the town of Young. She told the court she remembered Haigh coming to her office very clearly. She was attractive, long, light brown hair. She was vivacious, full of joy, full of youth. And the pair formed this quite unusual auntie-child relationship, as Janice described it, based largely on Amber Haigh just dropping in to chat. Mostly she'd be telling me about where she'd been. I'd be going cluck cluck about this or cluck about that. Amber would buy small pieces of jewellery from the local op shop to show Janice. The inspections on the little bedsit were rare. Janice could only remember one or two. She said Amber kept the bedsit like a 12-year-old would. There wasn't much of an effort to turn it into a home, she said. It was pretty cold and not very comfortable. She said she met Robert Geeves only once, when he and Amber and their little baby came to Janice's real estate office, and Amber introduced Robert Geeves as the daddy of her son. And Janice saw Amber with her newborn. She said she adored this little boy, like a child with a kitten, she said. He was a good-looking baby, wrapped in a bunny rug.
Ben, last week you mentioned that we were going to hear more evidence from workers from what was then known as the Department of Community Services. Were any of them on the stand?
We did hear from those workers. Jacqueline Thompson was a child protection worker with Docs, and she was charged with assessing the welfare of both Amber Haigh and her son. You'll also remember that last week the court began to hear more evidence about Robert Geeves's past. Jacqueline Thompson also gave evidence about this.
And what did she say?
She told the court she'd accessed police files that documented Robert Geeves's criminal history. When asked what she found out, she said this: Mr. Geeves was in a relationship with a woman and there was an incident of extreme violence where his partner was found in a wheelbarrow, tied up in a garage on the property and had a bag over her head and had died from a gunshot wound. Jacqueline Thompson told the court there was also an earlier incident in the police files regarding two schoolgirls who'd gone missing, who were ultimately found on Geeves's property. She said knowing this, there were concerns about Mr. Geeves's criminal history and the potential impact on Amber and her son.
And was Jacqueline asked about any case notes that Docs workers had made?
Jacqueline Thompson spent the best part of 2 days in the witness box going through case notes concerning Amber Haigh and her son. These were notes that spanned from the birth of Amber Haigh's son in January 2002 and ran to after her disappearance in the middle of that year. This is a time when Amber was living in the Geeves' marital home in Kingsvale in early 2002, and Jacqueline's note states there was a concern she was potentially being held against her will in the home. She said doc staff were worried, given Amber's vulnerabilities around Amber being exploited, to have a baby for the purpose of Mr. and Mrs. Geeves wanting a baby. Nurses and doc staff were also worried because Amber's new baby wasn't being brought to appointments with a baby health nurse, and Amber, who had epilepsy as well as an intellectual impairment, wasn't going to her own appointments either.
And did the defence contest this idea that Amber was allegedly being held against her will?
They did. They really interrogated this. Jacqueline Thompson told the court she was seeking to understand whether Amber was at the Geeves home willingly or whether she was being held there against her will, whether she was being manipulated by the older couple. She said this to the court: when you've got a mum who's got an intellectual disability and is so vulnerable, it was good to clarify what her plans were. But Thompson also said in the witness box that this narrative about Amber being held against her will was coming in large part from Amber's great aunt, as well as from police and from other sources. Thompson asked Amber about her situation and said that Amber said to her she wasn't worried about the Geeveses taking her baby from her and that she hadn't been tied up or sexually assaulted by Robert Geeves. Thompson said she took that statement at face value.
And what did she mean by that?
Well, this was interrogated as well, and she said, with my experience as a child protection worker, I know people may not disclose that even if it is happening, they may deny it out of fear or may not be ready to talk about any abuse.
And did the court hear anything about Doc's interactions with the Geeves after Amber had disappeared? Because they had custody of the baby at that point.
That's right, and this is the first time we've begun to hear about the weeks and months after Amber Haigh disappears. Jacqueline Thompson was taken to file notes from a home visit she made to the Geeves' house on the 30th of July 2002. This is a month after Amber Haig's been reported missing. In cross-examination, Anne Geeves' lawyer asked Jacqueline Thompson about a number of things she'd been told about Robert Geeves before she went to that meeting. One of the things you'd been told in preparation for your home visit was a concern that Robert Geeves was in a precarious and emotional state. Yes. That he was threatening suicide. Yes. That he was consuming excessive amounts of alcohol and drugs. I can't recall the specifics. That there were fears the child would be taken off him, but he was resigned to it. Yes. In the freehand notes that she took at the meeting, Jacqueline Thompson recorded the Geeves being asked, "Since Amber went missing, how are you both coping?" And Robert Geeves replied for both of them. He said, "We have to be strong, get up, look in the mirror, go to work." He denied he had a problem anymore with alcohol or that he was depressed. Amber's baby was ultimately taken from the Geeveses on the 9th of August 2002, less than a fortnight after that meeting, and about 2 months after Amber Haigh was last seen alive. It's Tuesday, and the court's risen for lunch. But just before we broke, we heard an interesting judicial intervention from the bench. We've heard evidence over a number of days focusing on Amber Haig's ability to parent her newborn son. And several reports have noted that Amber would sometimes give her baby to other people to burp after breastfeeding. And this has been presented as a suggestion she wasn't coping with the demands of motherhood. And when evidence returned to this point on Tuesday, this was the subject of judicial intervention. Justice Lonergan commented from the bench to a male-dominated bar table that for new mothers, breastfeeding can be relentless. And she said this: "It was a genuine attempt at assistance for the bar table. Having been the mother of a newborn baby and observing that probably nobody else at the bar table had, I just thought the reality of the relentlessness of it was something worth mentioning."
We'll be right back.
It's Thursday afternoon and James Arbour has left the witness box. Arbour was visibly relieved his time in the stand had finished. He came to court wearing the same blue flannel jacket both days and had an almost old-fashioned Australian way of talking. The judge at one point described him as a knockabout bloke. Arbour's a former soldier. He told the court about his after-school job in a butchery. If events occurred as he testified in court, it would make him one of the last people to see Amber Haigh alive. But over 2 days in the witness stand, his version of events was assailed in cross-examination.
Ben, much of the latter half of the week was spent focusing on a singular witness. What did the court hear?
James Arbour was in the witness box over 2 pretty excruciating days, and his evidence is unique to this trial. It's interesting, and he's not someone who's previously been heard from in a coronial inquiry or in media reportage around this case. He didn't know the Geeveses very well, but his evidence goes to a brief encounter he says he had with Amber and Robert and Anne Geeves sometime in June 2002, right before Amber's disappearance. James Arber's an Army veteran who grew up in Burrawa in New South Wales. It's about a 30-minute drive from Young and Harden. James Arber's father, Peter, was a panel beater and worked for a time with Robert Geeves in a vineyard. Even after he retired, Peter would pick up the odd job of panel beating, and he worked on Robert Geeves's car. James Arber told the court that when he was about 18, he came home from school in 2002 to find Robert Geeves standing in his front yard, along with Anne Geeves and Amber and her baby. James Arber says the Geeveses were there to pay for some work his father had done on their car. James says he was introduced to Amber Haigh, but every time he spoke to her, Anne or Robert would step in and answer for her. James told the court Robert Geeves said they were travelling to Sydney. James says he watched them leave. Robert was driving, Anne was in the front seat holding the baby, and Amber was in the back seat. James also says in the back were two large striped bags. He says they were chock-a-block. They were full.
Right, and what did James say happened after they left?
James told the court that a couple of hours after this, he and his father drive into town to get takeaway food. And then they stop at the Burrawa Mobile service station. And there they see the Geeveses again, filling their car up with fuel. But Amber's not in the car. He says that at the petrol station, Robert Geeves stopped pumping fuel and walked towards his father as his father approached. Robert came away from the car to sort of meet his father halfway. James says he could still see those large striped bags in the car, but their position had shifted. And he said where Amber had hopped in, there were now clothes, a mountain of clothes. He said they were loose, they weren't in a bag. He says his father joked, "Oh, are you back already?" And he says Geeves replied, "Nah, we're just getting some fuel." Afterwards, James Arber says he said to his dad, "Where's the young girl?" It wasn't until 2 decades later that James says he realised the potential import of what he says happened at that service station. In his quintessentially Australian way, he says he was in bed with the missus looking for tractor parts online, and his girlfriend showed him a missing persons page, and there was Amber Haigh. This is 2021 and he calls Crime Stoppers. He was then contacted by police. And later, he says police asked him to wear a wire and to go and talk to Robert and Anne Geeves. But he dismissed that idea. He said it was nonsense and a bit weird.
And so what was his cross-examination like?
It was long, it was brutal, and it was pretty withering. Michael King, who's acting for Anne Geeves, spent hours questioning James Arber about his memories from more than 2 decades ago. And under this interrogation, James Arber's evidence began to falter. He gave confused evidence on the colour of Geeves's car, first saying it was blue, then saying he couldn't remember, then saying it was canary yellow. He gave similarly confused evidence about the type of car the Geeveses had, whether it had 2 doors or 4, or a soft top or a hard roof. He'd originally told police he thought the service station sighting was in May 2002, but he subsequently said he thinks it was June 2002. The court also heard that there'd been multiple TV news reports made about Robert Geeves over the year, including on 60 Minutes and A Current Affair. And Michael King kept returning to this critical piece of information, the date that this interaction happened. When did he see the Geeveses at the petrol station? Was it actually in June of 2002? And he asked at one point whether James Arber had got that information from watching A Current Affair. And James replied, yes. You don't actually know the date. That's right. You read from internet research that Amber Haigh went missing on the 5th of June 2002. That's right. Under cross-examination, James Arber admits his dates and times could be a bit hit and miss. I've said that from day dot. My times and dates, they don't add up. Michael King at one point asked, if, for example, everything you've told us about, which you agree is hit and miss, is not the 5th of June, it's worthless, isn't it? It is. And James Arber said, I thought I had good information about her. And then a number of times, James Arbour said the detective who took his statement, Amanda Carey, had got it wrong in the statement that had been presented to the court. At one point, when he's shown a prior statement he made, he referred to it as nonsense. In re-examination, he was asked by the Crown Prosecutor, "When did you first realise there were things in your signed statement that you hadn't said to Ms Carey?" "I've never read it." "You've never read your statement?" James Arbour shook his head. "You signed a document that you knew was important evidence in a murder investigation that you didn't read." "When she was on the phone to me, we read it together, but I had my kids with me. It was what we call belt fed." And he then made the sound. And there was an exchange in court about what this was meant. And what he was talking about was an ammunition belt going through a firearm. This information was being belt fed. James Arbour even had to deny a suggestion at one point from Anne Geeves' lawyer that he was trying to write himself into a murder mystery. Lawyer Michael King at one point asked, "Mr. Arbour, can I suggest that what you've done is picked out some fragments of memories, added in a few fantasies, stitched them all together using the glue of tabloid sensationalism to end up with this not-so-neat story? What do you say about that?" James Arbour replied, "Yeah, you're right." It's Thursday afternoon and court has risen for the week. It's a short week this week and the evidence of James Arbour is complete. But there are elements from his evidence that were illuminating about the way the rest of this trial is likely to run. The defence was forensically focused on the police investigation into the Geeves and the nature of his interactions with Detective Amanda Carey, the detective who picked up this investigation into the Geeves in 2021. Detective Carey's been before the court already, very briefly and only in a very confined sense. She's not given her full testimony, and she'll return to the witness box later. There is still more, much more to come in this already extraordinary trial.
That was Guardian Australia reporter Ben Doherty. You can read all of his reporting on the trial of Robert and Anne Geeves on theguardian.com. In Australia, the crisis support service Lifeline is on 13 11 14. The National Family Violence Counselling Service is on 1800 737 732. Information and support for anyone affected by rape or sexual abuse issues is available at 1-800-RESPECT. This episode was also based on reporting by Gabrielle Chan. It was produced by Joe Koning, who also did the sound design. The executive producer is Miles Martignoni. You can find a link to every episode in the show notes. I'm Bridie Jabour, and we'll be back with more coverage of the trial next week.